I'll let the answer stand.
During your 26 years as a police officer, did you ever receive any complaints for abusing your power?
No.
Did you ever receive any complaints from the public?
No.
In training, did you attend all the training sessions required by the Brooklyn Center Police Department while you were there?
Yes.
And with respect to gun training, laser training, you attended all those too, right?
Yes, I did.
And did you pay attention?
Yes, I did.
With respect to that, in your approximation, and I'm not asking for exact numbers, but with respect to the training, what would you say the amount of training was for the firearm, for the gun, and the amount of training for the laser? What would be the percentages there?
For the firearms, it would be probably 80%. We spent a lot more time on firearms than we did on taser.
And tasers didn't come into the being until years after you're a law enforcement officer, right?
Yes, I believe trainers in this courtroom had said 2002 or 2003.
And you started as a law enforcement officer, what year?
1995.
With respect to tasers, I say lasers, with respect to tasers, there's been evidence in the case that you had a Taser 7, is that correct?
Yes.
And the evidence in that was that the Taser 7 was shaped like a gun, fair statement?
Yes.
And the Taser 7 had a dark black, or at least a dark handle, and a dark top. Do you remember that? I'm trying.
The objection is overruled. You may answer.
Yes.
The taser that you received, was it approximately a month before April 11th that you received this taser? Do you remember?
In the courtroom, I was told I received it on March the 26th.
Okay. And also, while we're there, with respect to these tasers and testing them, the rule that we read said should test the electronics every day. Is that right?
Yes.
And there is testimony that you didn't test yours a couple days. Is that right?
Yes, that's what I was told.
And do you agree with that you didn't test it?
I don't recall if I would have or wouldn't have.
And was that an important feature for law enforcement officers with new tasers
No.
that never used them since they had them?
Correct.
And while we're there, did you ever use a taser, use it by actually shooting it in all of your years' career as a law enforcement officer?
I would take my taser out on rare occasions, but I don't believe I ever deployed it.
Okay, when you take your taser out, it's to de-escalate what is going on. Is that a fair statement?
Sometimes, or to prepare for what might be behind a door. Sometimes an officer has a gun and sometimes an officer has a taser out.
All right. And now the taser that was switched from you, did that go to one of your partners, that taser?
My old taser?
Yes.
I believe they were just put in storage at the police department.
And those tasers were all yellow, right? The
Yeah.
handle, the top, the whole thing was yellow.
Yes, except for the battery pack. I believe that was black, and there was some
Okay.
markings on the side.
I'm going to show you these tasers. Show you this taser.
Objection, may we have a sidebar, please?
Yes. sustained.
Okay, well, do you specifically remember your old taser? By that I mean the one before the 7 being all yellow.
Yes.
And was that an X26 taser?
I believe it was an X26P.
P? So, with respect to the tasers, there's been evidence about signing some forms on warnings. Do you remember signing those forms?
In our annual training, we would be handed a form to sign, and I would sign it.
And do you remember the warnings on them at all?
Not from those days, no.
And with respect to weapons confusion, was there ever any training, actual training about weapons confusion as you remember it?
No.
Did you even know what weapons confusion was before?
Yeah.
Wait till I finish the question. Before April 11th?
It would be mentioned in training, but it wasn't something we physically trained on.
And by that you mean what?
There was no training on weapons confusion. You wouldn't be set in a dark room and told to grab which weapon.
So I'm going to go now to April 11th, 2021, a Sunday. And you surely remember that day. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you were in FTO that day for Officer Lucky?
Yes, I was.
And that day, what time did you go on duty?
6 a.m.
And was Lucky on duty at that time too?
Yes.
At about, what did you do during the morning? If you remember, did you just do drive around police work?
We just did police work. We would have checked a squad car if we wouldn't have had calls right away.
It was a Sunday.
It was a Sunday.
So approximately around 2 o'clock, did you pull up in back of, or not you, Officer Lucky was driving the car, right, the squad?
Yes.
And you were the FTO. Where were you seated in the car?
In the passenger seat.
And tell the jury what you remember about first seeing the white Buick on that day, approximately 2 p.m. And talk slowly.
Officer Lucky and I were driving south on Zane Avenue North. We were talking about pursuit policies, doing some regular FTO training, and he observed a vehicle in the turn lane with a blinker on inappropriately.
And was that the white Buick?
Yes.
And did you have a conversation with him about that?
Yes.
And what was that conversation?
We discussed a little bit of suspicious activity. He noticed a pine tree or air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror, and the tabs were expired.
And did you stop that vehicle?
Officer Lucky wanted to stop the vehicle, yes.
And let me ask you sort of a hypothetical. If you had been working alone that day on Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock, would you have stopped the vehicle for...
Objection, relevance, calls for speculation.
I can't even finish the question, Your Honor.
All right.
That's not fair. It's simply, they know how to try a lawsuit, I would
Okay.
think.
The objection is overruled. You may answer.
My question was, if you weren't with a field training officer that day and you were on patrol alone, would you have stopped that vehicle?
Most likely not.
And why not?
An air freshener to me is not, it's just an equipment violation. And during the COVID times, the high COVID times, the Department of Motor Vehicles was so offline that people weren't getting tabs, and we were advised not to try to enforce a lot of those things because the tabs were just not in circulation.
Okay, but you did stop the vehicle, right?
Yes, part of field training is that my probationer would make numerous contacts with the public throughout the day.
And what happened after the stop? Or if you remember, you've Go ahead.
Before Officer Lucky stopped the car, he ran the vehicle and confirmed that the registration was expired and that the registered owner had a petty misdemeanor type warrant for some type of drug offense.
And that was the registered owner of the vehicle?
Yes.
So you did that while you were still in the squad car and not?
Yes, it's part of the multitasking that a probationer will have to do, is run a vehicle license plate, call into dispatch, and initiate their lights.
Okay, and try and talk a little slower. I know you're probably nervous, but I'd like to get all this in. All right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you stopped the vehicle, is that right?
Officer Lucky initiates the traffic stop.
And what happened after he did that?
The vehicle stopped kind of in an entrance to the church on 63rd, and he got on the PA and told the vehicle to pull ahead just a short distance.
Was that because he was parked in the driveway of the?
Yeah, and I think there was a vehicle trying to come out, as I recall.
Okay. What happened next?
Officer Lucky and I exited our marked squad car. Officer Lucky walked up to the driver's door, and I stood at the right rear corner of the white Buick.
So you did get out of the car?
Most definitely.
And why did you stand where you were standing?
Part of it was so I could see where Officer Lucky was, and to provide cover to see what else was in the vehicle.
In your experience of 26 years and being a patrol officer all those years, is stopping any vehicle at any time that you don't know, does that be considered a dangerous situation?
Yes.
Why?
Sometimes there's guns in the car, sometimes there's uncooperative people. You don't know who you're stopping.
Yeah, because you don't know, right?
Right.
So while you were standing there in the rear of the vehicle, did you hear what Officer Lucky said?
I could hear parts of the conversation. He didn't seem to be in any distress when he was asking questions. He took out his notepad, and it looked like he was writing down something which would end up being a name and a date of birth.
Okay, and after he did that, did you two go back to the squad car?
Yes.
And at some point in time during the stop or right after it, did Officer Lucky do anything in connection with obtaining another squad car?
Yes, he called for a second car to come.
What is that about? What?
It would just be a backup officer. The registered owner had a warrant of some nature. It wasn't a bad warrant. It was just a regular petty warrant, which would still, you'd want a second officer. Or I guess in this case, a third officer. Officer Lucky and I are considered only one officer.
And why are you and Lucky just one officer?
Because he's in field training and he's a probationary employee.
All right. So did the third officer, Officer Johnson, arrive at some point in time?
Yes, Sergeant Johnson arrived.
And was that before you looked up in the computer about this driver of the vehicle, or after?
I don't know exactly when he arrived. I know Officer Lucky and I were Officer Lucky and I were discussing running the name he was given through some various systems.
Okay, and did you do that, you and Officer Lucky?
Yes.
Was there any correction that you told him about during this time that he shouldn't have put the name in one?
He had gone to the Minnesota, because the driver didn't provide him with any government-issued ID. He would have had to verify some information to run him properly in our system through TriTech. So you run them sometimes through Minnesota DVS with just a name and a date of birth. It'll give you a Soundex hit on various people with that either same name or common name with a date of birth.
So did you correct him on that?
We were talking about, I don't know if I corrected him on it, but
So what happened after that?
he would copy the OLN, which is a driver's license number, off the screen and then put it into our TriTech system, or CAD, and that would run him through the state for driver's license and warrants and other hits.
And did you find anything about the driver?
The driver came back with a suspended driver's license, gross misdemeanor, bench warrant for weapons, and a protection order.
So a gross misdemeanor for weapons ordinance, what went through your mind, if anything, when you read that?
It would be concerning that there'd be a weapon on the person or in the vehicle.
And why would that be?
In my experience over 26 years, I have found guns in cars, either by accident or by them just being sitting out in plain view.
And what about a person with a weapons warrant? Would that-
They're more likely to be carrying a weapon or have a weapon access to them.
So, what about the temporary, was it a temporary restraining order that came up? Was that it? Or?
Yeah, I think they're called ex parte orders. It would be a temporary protection order until the parties would either have a court hearing in front of a judge to make it a permanent order.
And there would be a name of a female on that?
Yes,
order?
there was.
And was there a female in the Buick or in the automobile that was stopped?
Yeah, in the front. Yes, in the front passenger seat.
So after you learned that, did you also learn something? Did Officer Lucky tell you something about drugs or marijuana?
When he initially got back to the car, he told me there was a obvious smell of marijuana and some seedlings or shake residue on the center console and inside the vehicle.
Okay. So with all of that information, what did you do next?
We told Officer Lucky explained to Sergeant Johnson what was going on. I corrected.
Where was Sergeant Johnson? Was he in your squad car?
He was standing at my passenger door.
Go ahead.
And Officer Lucky was explaining to Sergeant Johnson what was happening and what he wanted to do. Officer Lucky only told Sergeant Johnson that he had a warrant, and I told Officer Lucky that he needed to tell Sergeant Johnson what the warrant was for. A weapons violation warrant would be cause for care and concern.
All right. And after that conversation, what happened, if anything, next?
We got out of the vehicle. Sergeant Johnson was going to the passenger side. And
Excuse me, don't mean to interrupt you. Back up a little, I'm getting ahead of me. What was the plan when you got out of your vehicle with Lucky and Johnson was outside? What was your plan?
The plan was for Officer Lucky to get the driver into custody for the warrant, and we'd further investigate with the female who she was and if she was the petitioner or the subject of the restraining order.
Were you required by policy and law in learning about that warrant to arrest the driver of that car?
Yes, it was an order of the court.
And with respect to the restraining order, or whatever you called it, did proper police procedure that you knew of for 26 years required to find out who that lady was?
Yes.
And why would that be?
It's my duty to find out who she is to make sure she's not in harm's way. There's been times when that hasn't happened and somebody has ended up killed because that wasn't followed.
So now we're at the Buick. It's a Buick car, white car. Is that
It's a
right?
white car.
And now we're at the white car, and you three went up to it, correct?
Yes, Sergeant Johnson went up to the
Where did
passenger
Johnson
side.
go?
He went up the passenger side to provide cover.
And what does provide cover mean?
Keep an eye on the occupants of the vehicle and just to monitor what's happening outside in the world. See if
And-
people are walking up on you or things go wrong.
And where were you located?
I was towards the left rear corner of the car.
And where was Officer Lucky?
He was advancing to the driver's door.
And how, by the way, before this, how long had you known Officer Lucky?
I think we were on our 5th shift.
And he was pretty new arrival, was he? Or,
I believe he was in second phase maybe, but he had been a police officer before.
okay, what does second phase mean?
He wasn't in his initial 4 weeks. He was in the start of his second 4 weeks.
And you testified you knew, at least back then, that he had come from another police department, correct?
Yes, I think he worked at 2 previous agencies, and he was an explorer.
Okay. Now let's go back to when you three arrived at the white car. We've already said where you're located. Officer Lucky was at the driver's door, is that right?
Yes, he would have been standing behind the post between the driver's door and the rear passenger door.
What do you mean by that, standing behind the post?
He wouldn't have been directly in front of the door because that would be unsafe approach.
And this was this a warm day? Was the window down? Remember?
I don't know if the window was down or not.
Okay. But in any event, where were you standing again?
At the left rear corner.
And did you hear what Officer Lucky said?
Yes, I heard him ask the driver to step out of the vehicle a couple of times.
And did the driver step out of the vehicle finally?
Finally, he asked Officer Lucky a couple of times what was going on, and Officer Lucky said he would explain to him.
When he got out of the car?
Yes.
And so did the driver get out of the car?
Yes.
And what do you remember happening next?
Officer Lucky had him turn around, and I think he was still asking what was going on. Sergeant John,
Who's he?
the driver,
Go ahead.
and Sergeant Johnson and Lucky told him he was under arrest, and I told him he had a warrant.
Okay, so who said he was under arrest first?
Sergeant Johnson, I believe.
And Sergeant Johnson testified here. You remember that?
Yes.
And after he said that, did Officer Lucky say he was under arrest too?
Yes.
And you heard that?
Yes.
And what did you say then?
I told him he had I told him he had a warrant.
You just said warrant.
I think so.
Did you specify what kind of warrant, if you remember? If you don't.
I don't think I would have. It wouldn't have been in my normal.
Okay, so what happened after Johnson and Lucky said you're going to be handcuffed or you're under arrest, and you said that there was a warrant? What happened next?
Officer Lucky had him put his hands behind his back, and I noticed that in the driver's right hand was something. It was paper or something, and I took it out of his hand and had it in my left hand.
And you had that in your left hand?
Yes.
And then what happened next? Why strike that? When you did that, I take it you got closer to the driver?
Yes. I reached into the driver's hand and took out what he had in his right hand.
Right hand or left hand?
His right hand, and I held it in my left hand.
Okay. And what happened next?
Officer Lucky started to say something about, don't do that, don't tense up, stop doing that. And then it just went chaotic.
What do you remember happening after that?
I remember a struggle with Officer Lucky and the driver at the door. The driver was trying to get back into the car.
Well, he was trying to get back in the car. What did you do?
I went around Officer Lucky as they're trying to get back in the door. I'm between the door and Officer Lucky and the driver. And the driver's getting into the car.
And what happened next?
They're still struggling, and I can see Sergeant Johnson and the driver struggling over the gear shift, because I can see Johnson's hand, and then I can see his face.
And you knew Johnson for many years before this, is that right?
Yes.
And by looking at his face at that point in time, what did you interpret it to mean?
He had a look of fear on his face. It's nothing I'd seen before.
Did you say anything when you saw this? What did you do?
We were struggling. We were trying to keep him from driving away. It just went chaotic. And then I remember yelling, "Taser, taser, taser," and nothing happened. And then he told me I shot him.
Can you proceed, or do you?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay. After the driver said you shot him, do you remember what you said, or do you? If you don't remember, did you look at the video and see what you said? Or do you actually remember what you said, I guess is my question, not with help from a video.
I don't remember what I said.
And what do you remember next, if anything?
They had an ambulance for me, and I don't know why. And then I was at the station. I don't remember a lot of things afterwards.
Do you remember saying something about prison?
No.
If you did say that, do you have any idea now why you would say that?
No.
Was the climate back then about police officers a little rough?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
The objection is sustained.
All right. You don't remember saying it,
No.
and you don't know why you said it.
No.
Do you remember the response that our Sergeant Johnson or Major Johnson gave you?
No.
And when next do you remember what happened, if anything? If you remember.
I remember getting an ambulance, and then I was at the station.
Okay. And you remember being in the ambulance, arriving at the station?
No.
You don't remember the
No.
station?
I remember getting to the station.
Once you got to the station, do you remember what happened next?
The next thing I remember is Officer Fricky was in the room with me
And where were you located? Do you remember that?
in the front office.
Okay. In the front office room, do you remember, were you sitting down, standing up?
I was on the floor.
And after that, at some point in time, did your husband show up?
Yes.
At what time do you believe, from back there, April 11th, at what time do you believe that your memory came back to you?
Probably when my husband got there. So much of it is missing.
After that night, and for the last few months, have you been in therapy?
Yes.
And did you still work as a police officer there?
No,
Did you quit?
I did.
And this was your career?
Yes.
And when did you quit?
A day or two after the incident.
And why did you quit?
There was so much bad things happening. I didn't want my coworkers, and then I didn't want anything bad to happen to the city.
And did you own a home in Anoka or Hennepin County at the time?
Yes.
You and your husband?
Excuse me.
The objection is relevant.
The objection is overruled.
Did you own a home, your family home, for years past?
Yes.
And did you sell it?
Eventually.
Before you sold it, did you move out of the state?
Yes.
And do you now live out of state?
Yes.
We have a moment, Your Honor. Thank you. I'm done, Your Honor.
Is Cross?
Your Honor.
morning, Ms. Potter.
Good morning.
You've been a police officer, or were a police officer for 26 years. Isn't that
Yes.
right? You said you started in 1995,
Yes.
and that was with the Brooklyn Center Police Department for that entire career, right?
Yes.
And you said that you resigned from the Brooklyn Center Police Department, right?
Yes.
And that was on April 12th of this year, right?
Yeah, within a day or two of the incident.
Right after you had shot and killed Daunte Wright.
Yes.
And throughout that time period, you were a licensed peace officer, right?
Yes.
And to become licensed, you had to go through a number of requirements. Fair?
Yes.
You had a college degree.
Excuse me, Your Honor, the prosecutor speaking to that mic too.
Sure.
Thank you.
You have a college degree, right?
Yes.
And you also had to complete the peace officer education program, that skills component that you talked about.
Yes.
And that included skill sets and classroom training as well.
Yes.
You had to pass an exam to become an officer.
Yes.
And then you did all that before you started with the Brooklyn Center Police Department in 95, right?
Yes.
And then you got your license through the post board, correct?
Yes.
And that stands for Peace Officer Standards and Training.
Yes.
So you were licensed throughout that whole 26-year career, right?
Yes.
And you maintained all of the requirements to keep your license,
Yes.
including all the training that was required for it as well, right?
Yes.
And that training that's required for your license has all different kinds of components, true?
Yes.
You know, things like use of force, use of firearms, tasers, all kinds of things.
Yes.
And you did all that training.
Yes.
And you did all that every year throughout that 26-year period, right?
Yes.
Sometimes multiple times a year, right?
Yes.
And all of those requirements were in place to make sure that you were at the beginning of your career and continued to be, competent and capable of performing the requirements of the job, right?
Yes.
You mentioned on direct that you were also a hostage negotiator as part of your duties, right?
Crisis negotiator.
Crisis negotiator. Did that involve some hostage type situations?
I've never had a hostage situation.
Okay, but crisis negotiation.
Yes.
And that involved some de-escalation tactics, I presume, correct?
Yes.
And you had to develop that skill set and be pretty good at de-escalating situations as a crisis negotiator, fair?
Yes.
So you had some experience in stressful situations doing that?
No.
So you were a crisis negotiator but never experienced a stressful situation?
We talk to people.
Talk to people in crisis.
Yes.
And part of your job as a police officer is dealing with people on their worst days, right?
Yes.
People who don't want to cooperate with you sometimes, right?
Most of the people we talk to in crisis are either barricaded behind a door or talking to you from another room.
Okay. For 26 years, you were a patrol officer, right?
Yes.
So you saw people out on the street every day as part of your job duties. Fair?
Yes.
And you talked about doing a lot of traffic stops during that career, correct?
I did some traffic stops.
Okay. Well, in some of those cases, there are people who have weapons, right?
Yes.
Sometimes people want to flee, right?
Yes.
Sometimes people are violent.
Yes.
And all of that's part of being a police officer, dealing with people in those situations, right?
Yes.
You'd agree that you're bound by policy and the requirements of the job that Brooklyn Center, the police department, sets for you, right?
Yes.
And you heard Commander Fleslin testify, but you had to acknowledge those policies and essentially agreed to abide by them every year you were an officer, fair?
Yes.
And you'd agree that your fundamental duty as a police officer is to safeguard life, right?
Yes.
And you also have the duty to never employ unnecessary force. True?
Yes.
Part of the policy also includes some of your responsibilities as an officer, right?
Yes.
And that includes being alert and attentive and capable of performing your job, right?
Yes.
And getting back to the training and sort of the post requirements, there's a lot of training that goes into being a police officer, fair?
Yes.
And we talked about a couple of those things, but one of those subjects is use of force, right?
Is that a yes?
Yes.
And use of force can include things like restraints, handcuffs, defensive tactics, chemical irritants, using batons, tasers, less lethal weapons, and firearms as well, right? All those things are options available to you. True?
Not all of them.
Okay, well, you carry a whole number of things on your duty belt every day, right?
Yes.
And that includes a firearm and a taser, right?
Yes.
And you also had other items on that duty belt as well, correct?
Yes.
And as part of the training that you went through every year, they cover topics of all kinds of uses of force, right?
Yes.
Including the things on your duty belt and maybe other options that the department could use additionally, true?
Only the things I was assigned on my duty belt.
Okay. But in any case, that use of force training was a pretty key component of being an officer, right?
Yes.
You were trained about when you could use force, how much force to use, and what would be appropriate force. Fair?
Fair.
And not only were you trained on that, but you had a lot of policy that that dictated what you could and could not do in a particular situation, right?
Yes.
And you were also trained on the readiness aspects of use of force, right? Being ready to engage whatever force might be required, right?
Yes.
Including making decisions under stress, right?
What do you mean?
Well, you had a lot of scenario-based training, right?
Yes.
And in those situations, those scenarios were set up to be as close as they could be to real life, right?
I suppose.
So you would be trained to have to make decisions in the moment about what to do and what force to use, right?
Well, it was a training situation, so it was usually slow and meticulous and controlled.
Well, you did this year after year, right, for the entirety of your career, correct?
I think scenario-based training started later, probably the last 10 or 15 years.
Sure, but use of force training has been around for a long time, right?
Yes.
Because since you started as a police officer, you have, in some cases, had to use force, true?
Yes.
And there are limitations on how and when to use that force, right?
Yes.
So you've had training on that throughout your entire career, right?
Yes.
And as part of that process, the way that it's required for you to maintain your license is that you sign in and you sign off on attendance forms, and you basically, you have to be there, right? You can't not be there, right?
Right.
And every year you have a certain number of training hours that are required, right?
Yes.
And you said on direct that you participated and you were paying attention during all those trainings, true?
Yes.
And some of those trainings had classroom instruction, PowerPoints, things like that, right?
Yes.
Some of them also included reviewing policies and other documents, right?
Yes.
And then there was also the hands-on training with the practical components, things like using drawing weapons, things like that, right?
Yes.
And over the course of your career, you completed many, many, many hours of training, right?
Yes.
And in terms of credit hours, we're talking somewhere in the ballpark of 1,700 credit hours. Does that sound right?
I don't know the number of hours, but if that's what you have. That would be probably right.
No reason to dispute that your training hours would have been in the thousands of hours over that 26-year career, right?
Yes.
You indicated that there weren't tasers available when you first started at Brooklyn Center. True?
No, they came in the early 2000s.
Okay. But in 1996, you had a firearm, right?
In 1995, yes.
Sorry, 95, and then you were sworn in 96, right?
No, I was sworn in February 27, 1995.
Okay. So in 95, when you first started, you had a firearm available to you.
Yes.
And you were trained to use that firearm.
Yes.
Trained how to handle it, right?
Yes.
Trained how to load it and unload it.
Yes.
Trained how to draw it,
Yes.
right? And fire it. And how to safely handle it, yes?
Yes.
And that included when not to fire it, right?
I suppose.
And that training started at the beginning of your career, you said in 95, but continued every year up until the time you resigned, right?
Yes.
Now, you indicated that tasers came later, but you were first trained on using a taser in 2002, correct?
If that's what the documents say, I'm not sure when they came out.
And if the documents say you were trained in 2002, you then would have been trained every year thereafter, right?
Yes.
And you started carrying a taser on your duty belt regularly as of 2005, right?
Yes.
But at a minimum, in addition to all the other training you had, you would have had taser training year after year for at least the last 19 years, right?
Yes.
And the taser training that's required, you saw the documents that were in court, also requires not only it requires review of policy, right? The taser policy, right?
Yes.
And it also requires practicing those reaction side draws, correct?
Sometimes.
All right, if we could put up Exhibit 334, please, the last page. I'm going to put on the screen what's already been admitted as Exhibit 334. And we're going to scroll down to the very last page and highlight the subsection C, please. So, as part of the taser policy includes that all training should include performing reaction hand draws or cross draws to reduce the possibility of accidentally drawing and firing a firearm. That's part of the policy, right?
That's what it says.
And that's part of what you're trained to do, correct?
We didn't always we aren't always drawing our tasers from our holsters. A lot of times we were in plain clothes during training.
Okay. Well, your policy that you're required to abide by, that you signed off on, requires that you perform reaction hand draws, true?
During the training, yes.
It also includes the reason for that, right?
Yes.
And that's so that you reduce the possibility of accidentally drawing and firing a firearm, right?
Yes.
And we can take that down. Part of the reason for that is weapons confusion, right?
Yes.
And that was known in the field and has been known for a number of years. True?
I guess.
Well, you were trained on it, right?
We talked about it.
It was part of your PowerPoints, correct?
Yes.
You were made aware during PowerPoint after PowerPoint after PowerPoint that drawing and firing the wrong weapon can happen, right?
We were told it wasn't something that they expounded on.
You were told that.
Yes.
And you signed documentation every year you were certified acknowledging that you knew the risks, received and reviewed the materials required for you to carry that taser, correct?
Yes, I signed the documents.
Okay. Now, in terms of the carrying of these weapons, reaction side means what for you?
That'd be my left hand.
Okay. You're right-handed?
Yes.
So carrying a taser, you have done for years on your left side, correct?
Yes.
And your firearm you carry where?
On my right side.
How many years have you carried your firearm and your taser that way?
My firearm for 26 years, and my taser, according to your documents, for 19.
So as long as you've had that taser, you've carried it on your left side, correct?
In the beginning, I carried it on my right side in a drop holster.
And when did you switch?
When we were given new holsters,
And when would that have been?
I don't know.
Okay. But far before 2016, you saw the images that were up in court. Long before that, you were carrying your taser on your left side, correct?
Yes.
Years and years, right?
Yes.
We talked a little bit about reality or scenario-based training. When you go through those trainings, you have available to you all the options that would be on your duty belt, right? Although inert for the purposes of training, right?
Yes.
And the purpose of that training is to try to recreate real-life stressful situations as best as possible to practice making those types of decisions in the moment. Fair?
Fair.
Let's talk a little bit about your taser. You'd agree that the Taser 7 that you have and the taser you had before that has a safety mechanism on the side of it, right?
Yes.
And you have to flip it up to arm the taser.
Yes.
And when the taser is on and armed, it beeps, right?
I don't know if it beeps.
There's a display screen that turns on.
Yes.
And then there are two lasers with the Taser 7 that appear on your target, right?
Yes.
A green one for the top probe, right?
I believe so. It was a new taser.
And a red one for the bottom.
I would guess so, yes.
Well, you were trained on it, right?
Yes, but it was a while back.
Well, you were
Been on.
trained in March of this year on that taser, correct?
Yes.
And you have to successfully operate and handle that taser in order to be certified to use it, correct?
Yes.
And you went through that hands-on process of turning on that taser and safely handling that taser in order to be certified, correct?
Yes, in March.
In March. And before that, you had an X26P, correct?
Yes.
And that taser also had a laser and a safety and things like that, right?
Yes.
The screen that turned on.
Yes.
And the taser, and that was the taser that you had been carrying for years before, right?
Yes.
Very similar to the Taser 7 in that way.
Similar but different.
All right, so I'm going to put on the screen next to each other, please, Exhibits 210 and Exhibit 212. Now, this is a picture, side-by-side pictures of you on April 11th, correct?
Yes.
And your taser is pictured on the left side of your duty belt, correct?
Yes.
And that's the way you'd been carrying it for years and years, correct?
Yes.
And your firearm you carried on the right side of your duty belt, right?
Yes.
And you'd agree that the standard procedure for a reaction side, left hand draw for your taser in this case, would be to draw that weapon with your left hand, correct?
Yes.
All right, you can take that down. You were asked some questions on direct about spark testing, the function test of the taser. The policy says that you should do that before the beginning of every shift, right?
Yes.
And you didn't do it the last 2 shifts that you worked, correct?
That's what the documents say.
Right. You didn't do one for the last 4 of your last 10 shifts that you worked, in fact, correct? If that's what the documents say.
Which dates?
You didn't do it on March 27th, correct?
I guess.
You didn't do it on March 28th.
Your Honor, I object to this cross-examination if she doesn't know. She should
All
know.
right.
She should
Okay.
have
Okay.
to know.
One word objections, please. If she doesn't know, she can say she doesn't know.
If the documents show that you didn't do a spark test 4 of your last 10 shifts, you have no reason to dispute that, right?
No.
And the day of this incident on April 11th, you didn't do a spark test that day, right?
No, according to the documents.
And even though, that day was a slow and uneventful day at the beginning of the day, right?
I don't know. I don't have a log.
Well, you told Dr. Miller that that day started as a slow and uneventful Sunday, right?
I don't know if I did or not.
Council sidebar. Okay, you may continue.
All right. So April 11th started as a slow and uneventful day, right?
I guess it's a Sunday.
Okay. I'm going to put on the screen exhibits 224 and exhibit 178 next to each other, please. All right, Ms. Potter, on the screen are exhibits 224 and 178. You'd agree that these are photos of your taser and your firearm, respectively, yes?
My firearm for sure. I'm not sure if that's the taser that was taken that day, but I'm guessing it is.
And you carried a taser 7 that day, correct?
Yes.
And that's what's in this picture, exhibit 224?
Yes.
Now, these items look different, don't they?
Yes.
Your Honor's argumentative.
The objection is overruled. I think you answered. Did you answer? You may answer if you didn't.
Yes.
And just to be more specific, the taser is yellow, right?
Yes.
The firearm is black, correct?
Yes.
The taser weighs about half as much as your loaded Glock, right?
I don't know.
Doesn't weigh the same, correct?
That's what they testified to earlier, but I don't know.
When it comes to the Taser 7 that you had just been recertified on or certified to use, your department used long-range cartridges for that Taser 7, correct?
I don't know.
You were trained to use it, correct?
I don't know now. I don't remember.
You don't remember being trained to use the Taser 7 at all?
No, I remember being trained, but I don't remember today what cartridges we were issued.
Okay. So you went out on the street with the taser, not knowing what that taser did?
I would assume that on the day I worked, I would know, but I don't know. It's been months now.
Okay. No reason to dispute that the Brooklyn Center Police Department used long-range cartridges in the Taser 7, correct?
No.
And the reason to do that would be so that you could fire at a farther distance with your taser, and you wouldn't need to approach someone up close, correct?
I don't know. I would assume so, but I'm not positive.
Well, that's why someone would use a long-range cartridge as opposed to a short-range cartridge, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you've been trained on tasers since 2002, correct?
Yes.
You know how they work, right? And you know
Yes.
what they do. Could we take those down, please, and put up Exhibit 214? Okay, Exhibit 214 that's been admitted is on the screen. Is this a picture of your duty belt?
Yes.
You'd agree that the holsters for your taser and your firearm are different, correct?
Yes.
And your firearm holster is empty in this picture, right? There's no firearm in it.
Correct.
Is that this right here?
Yes.
The taser holster is made of plastic, right?
Yes.
You have to push a button, this button right here, and rock it back to get it out of the holster, correct?
Yes.
And your gun holster is made of leather, is that right?
Yes.
And it has a little snap, is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
And how does that gun come out of that holster?
It would rock forward.
How do you pull it with your hand out of your holster?
It would rock forward and you would pull it up.
Okay. And the taser, on the other hand, you would press the button, rock it backward, and pull it up, correct?
Yes.
All right, if we could take that down, thank you. Now, you testified that you have never deployed your taser or your firearm while on duty out on the street, correct?
Not that I recall. I know for sure my firearm.
Okay. But you have drawn your taser multiple times while on duty, correct?
Several times.
And you said that you did that as a way to de-escalate. I believe that was your testimony on direct.
Yes.
And approximately how many times did you pull your taser but not deploy it while on duty?
For de-escalation, maybe a few times.
Now, there are a couple times that you pulled your taser and didn't deploy it. One was in 2013, correct? No reason to dispute that it happened once in 2013 at least?
I would guess no reason.
There was a situation where one of your colleagues, a former officer, was hanging on the back of an individual, and you pointed the taser at him but didn't tase him because you would have tased your fellow officer. Is that right?
If it's the one I'm thinking, yes.
And instead of
She was on his back.
deploying your taser, you called for extra help, correct?
Yes, and we'd probably continue to fight with him.
You never deployed your taser then.
No.
There was another incident in 2016 where someone was not complying with commands to place them under arrest, right?
I don't know what event you're talking about.
Well, in this case, there was an individual who was struggling, a female individual. She didn't want to get in handcuffs, and then one of the officers took her down to the ground by force, correct? And you pointed your taser but didn't deploy it, right?
If that's what the documents say. I don't recall the incident.
Okay. But you recall that you have drawn your taser and not fired it in your 26-year career.
Yes.
All right, I'd like to talk a little bit more about April 11th. So, on April 11th, you were serving as an FTO, right?
Yes.
And you said that you have done that for 10 or 15 years.
For many years. I don't remember when I got certified, but it's been many, many years.
Okay. And you said that on direct, I believe your testimony was that you had knowledge to impart and that mentorship skills that made you suited for that job, right?
Yes.
So you were serving as Officer Lucky's FTO on April 11th. How long had you been his FTO?
I believe it would be 5 shifts. It would have started the Monday after Easter Sunday.
Okay. But you were essentially in a supervisory position, right? Serving as his FTO.
Yes, I guided him.
It's a big responsibility, true?
Yes.
You have to be a good example, sort of set the stage for what a good police officer should do in any particular situation, right?
Yes.
And to do the job of an FTO, you have to be really familiar with policy and training and proper uses of force, right?
Yes.
And you have to make sure that someone else is doing it all right too, right?
Correct.
And you testified that morning, the morning of April 11th, you reviewed pursuit policy with Officer Lucky, correct?
That afternoon.
Okay. But that pursuit policy includes not shooting at the driver or occupants of a vehicle, right?
A moving vehicle.
And you told Officer Lucky, we're not in the city, right? Did you tell Dr. Miller that you told Officer Lucky in reviewing pursuit policy, you used the phrase, we're not in the city?
Because we're on Zane Avenue, which is in Brooklyn Park.
And why did you say that?
To remind him of geographical boundaries.
And you were also reminding him of the limitations of the pursuit policy, correct?
What do you mean?
That you can't just get into a high-speed car chase or shoot up a car without specific reasons, right?
Yes, our pursuit policy limits what we can pursue for.
And a gross misdemeanor warrant doesn't qualify for a vehicle pursuit, right?
Not according to our policy.
And you had just reviewed that policy with Officer Lucky that day, correct?
Yes.
So getting to what happened with the stop, you said that there was a turn signal misplacement, perhaps. You saw the wrong turn signal. That was the first thing that you saw?
Officer Lucky saw it first.
Okay, so you didn't see the wrong turn signal. But after that, you saw the air freshener, right?
I saw the expired registration.
Well, you had said on direct that you would not have pulled that vehicle over, right?
Probably not.
And you said that you knew that there had been some delays because of COVID with people getting their tabs up to date, right?
Yes.
But you also mentioned the air freshener to counsel on direct, didn't you?
Yes.
But regardless, expired tabs, air freshener, this is the kind of traffic stop that is pretty routine for you in your 26 years as a cop, right?
No traffic stops routine, but it would have been something I would have done several times.
I'm sure you've seen lots and lots of cars with air fresheners and expired tabs. True?
Yes.
And then the decision was made to pull over the car. You mentioned that there was some information that maybe there was some other warrant that you learned about around that time. You didn't discuss any of that with Officer Lucky, did you?
He would have had the same warrant hit that I would have heard.
None of that was mentioned. None of it was even worth discussing with Officer Lucky at the time you pulled over the car. Fair?
I don't remember if we talked about it or not.
Okay. But in any case, you pull over the car, and Officer Lucky approaches the driver's side, approaches Mr. Wright, right?
Yes.
And he came back to the car with a name, date of birth, all kinds of information, right?
I know a name and a date of birth.
Well, Officer Lucky told you that he believed him. He thought that essentially that Mr. Wright was telling the truth, right?
Yes.
And then when Officer Lucky put in all this information into the system, you corrected him, you admonished him, you told him he was doing it wrong, right?
I told him better ways to do it, probably.
And that's your job as an FTO, right?
Yes.
To correct him if he messes something up, right?
Yes, when there was an opportunity.
So you corrected him, and then he re-entered the information, and then you found out about the warrant, right?
Yes.
Now there was also a conversation about Officer Lucky code 4ing himself, right?
Doing what?
Code 4ing
Oh,
himself.
code 4ing, yes.
And did you also correct Officer Lucky for doing that?
He did it before he ran the driver, and he shouldn't do that.
And you told him that, right?
Yes,
Don't code 4 yourself before you have all the information. Something to that effect, right?
yes,
And again, that was your job as the FTO to correct whatever he was doing that was wrong, right?
yes.
So you got this information and then made this decision to go arrest Mr. Wright, correct?
Yes.
And you didn't talk about going out there with guns drawn or anything like that. You didn't talk about using force on the approach or anything like that, right?
No.
And then Officer Lucky pulled or asked Mr. Wright to get out of the car, which he did, right?
Yes.
And you stood back and watched this happen, correct?
I was just a couple feet away.
Okay. But you didn't correct the way that had happened. You didn't tell Officer Lucky to move or to put Mr. Wright somewhere else, right?
I wouldn't do that to a rookie in front of a suspect.
Okay. But you didn't do it regardless. Didn't happen.
No.
And then as you approached and got closer, was there a moment that you got closer after things didn't quite go the way you had hoped they would go?
I got closer before that happened.
Okay. And you'd agree that you unsnapped your gun holster as you approached, right?
No, I wouldn't agree to that.
All right, if we could put on the screen Exhibit 12, just the still image at 2:01:20, please. And zoomed in on, yes, the squad car view. You see yourself in that picture,
Yes.
and you see your right hand on the right side of your duty belt.
Yes.
And is your right hand on your firearm here?
It's blurry, but it's possible.
Okay. We can take that down, thank you. All right, so as you approached and Mr. Wright got out of the car, was there a moment where it appeared that Mr. Wright was going to flee or attempt to flee?
When he started struggling with Officer Lucky.
Okay. And ultimately, was Mr. Wright able to get back in the car?
Yes.
You never saw a weapon on Mr. Wright, did you?
No.
Never saw a gun.
No.
He never threw a punch, right?
No.
Never kicked anyone.
No.
Never said, I'm going to kill you.
No.
Never said, I'm going to shoot you.
No.
Never said, there's a gun in the car and I'm coming after you.
No.
Okay. It's not uncommon in your experience to find someone who has a warrant during a traffic stop, right?
It's not uncommon.
And you've done hundreds of traffic stops in your career, correct?
I don't know if hundreds, but yes, I've done plenty of traffic stops.
And gross misdemeanor offenses are not the same as felony offenses. Fair?
Correct. They're different order by the judge. For
Less
the crime.
serious crimes, correct?
All crimes are serious, but yes.
Well, in terms of the laws of the state of Minnesota that you're duty bound to enforce, a gross misdemeanor is a lesser offense than a felony, correct?
Yes.
And you don't get to shoot someone because they have a gross misdemeanor warrant, correct?
Not for.
Correct, Your Honor. It depends on the circumstances.
Okay, the objection is sustained.
As the chair,
Will disregard that question.
You also testified about learning about an order for protection, correct?
Yes.
You said it was a temporary one that you saw, correct?
I believe it was an ex parte order.
And essentially, the order that you're describing would limit contact between two people, correct?
Yes, in various ways.
It doesn't prohibit all contact with all members of the opposite sex, right?
Just certain parties that they're not supposed to have contact with.
Right. And you'd agree that half the world's population is female, right?
I suppose.
So just having a female passenger in your car is not in and of it and by itself a violation of an OFP, correct?
It has to be investigated.
Sure. And you did not see a need to rush up to the passenger side of the vehicle and pull this woman to safety, right?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Now, there was also some conversation, as you saw in the videos that were offered in court in this case, conversation about the Wright brothers. You made a comment about the Wright brothers joking about not the ones that fly, right?
Yes.
And then any concerns about whether there was some other Wright family in the area. Sergeant Johnson told you not that family, not this situation, right?
I wasn't sure who they were.
Okay. But he didn't cause you any greater, he didn't tell you this is the family we should be concerned about. We got to be worried about this guy, right?
No, he didn't say anything like that.
Okay. And when you got over to that car and Mr. Wright got back into the car was still running, right? It was running that whole time?
I don't know if it was on or not.
Well, you told Dr. Miller that the car was running, didn't you?
I don't remember that.
You told Dr. Miller that Wright pulled away and got back into the driver's seat of the car, which was still running.
Okay, then I said that.
And the entire time this is happening, you're standing behind Officer Lucky, right?
At what point?
As Mr. Wright is getting back in the car.
I came around Officer Lucky's left side to help him.
And you indicated that Sergeant Johnson had approached on the passenger side, but he wouldn't have been in front of the door because that would have been unsafe, right?
Yes.
Okay. I am going to put on the screen Exhibit 13, starting at 2:01:48. Just that, if you could just leave it with that time frame, please. Okay, Ms. Potter, on the screen we have Exhibit 13 at 2:01:48. I'm going to slowly advance the frames and then pause it periodically. So let's advance just a bit. Okay, stopping right there. At 2:01:48, do you see yourself here taking a piece of paper in your left hand?
Yes.
All right, now advancing to 2:01:49, please. Okay, now stopping at 2:01:49, you see that you've transferred that piece of paper to your right hand.
It looks like it.
You can advance a little further, please. Okay, would you agree that the piece of paper at 2:01:49 is in your right hand?
I don't know where it is.
Is this the piece of paper right here?
Yeah, it's a piece of paper.
All right, let's advance a couple more frames, please. Okay, stopping right there. Would you agree in this frame of 2:01:49 that the piece of paper is in your right hand?
Yes.
All right, and if we could play stopping at 2:01:54, please. Okay. And then if we could advance a few frames, please. At this point, the paper is in your right hand, correct?
It appears that way.
And then at 2:01:55, we could stop right there. You've just transferred the paper back to your left hand, correct?
That's what the video shows.
Okay. And then if we could advance a few more frames, please. To 2:01:56. A couple more frames, please. Okay, you'd agree at 2:01:56 the piece of paper is still in your left hand, correct?
Yes.
Okay, let's advance. Actually, let's play until 2:02:01, please. Okay, so stopping at 2:02:01. You have the firearm in your right hand, correct? And you are pointing it directly at Mr. Wright, correct?
Excuse me, Eric, do we have a break? My client is...
Okay. Miss Potter, do you need to take a break? Okay. It's lunch anyway, so... Okay, members of the jury, we're going to break for lunch, and we'll start up again at 1:30, okay? Yes, you may step down. Okay.
Hello everyone, Tim Blotz in the Fox 9 studios. You've been watching our special coverage this morning of the trial of Kim Potter for first and second degree manslaughter in the shooting death of Daunte Wright from that traffic stop that happened last April 11th up in Brooklyn Center. You've just witnessed some emotional moments on the stand as she's taking the stand in her own defense, recalling the moments that led up to the shooting. And you saw the second point here in testimony this morning where she's asked to look at the videotape and at least re-describe what happened. And of course, that resulted in us taking a lunch break right now. Earlier, under initial exam by her attorney, Earl Gray, I should say, she described the moment that it happened and the look of fear on the face of Sergeant Johnson, who was reaching into the car to try to disengage the shift mechanism to keep it from driving forward. She said, "We were trying to keep him from driving away. It went chaotic. I remember yelling, 'Taser, taser, taser.' And then something happened, and he told me I had shot him." And that's when she broke down into tears. Earl Gray asked her if she needed a moment, and they continued on. So we are going to take a short lunch break here. These typically last about an hour. We are going to wrap up our coverage here on Fox 9 for the moment, return you to special programming for all of you who want to continue on the live stream on fox9.com and on our YouTube channel. My colleague Paul Bloom will join us along with Debbie Lang, our legal analyst here, to look at this trial so far this morning and replay some of the key testimony from Kim Kim Potter as she took her own defense. In the meantime, for all of our viewers on Fox 9, we are going to now return you to special programming, to our programming that's on the air, and we will return with our special programming here when the jury returns. Thanks for joining us. To all of our streaming viewers, thank you for a moment while we signed off on Fox 9. We're going to continue our coverage right now on fox9.com and on our YouTube channel. I want to bring in Paul Bloom and Debbie Lang, who have been watching all of this. Paul, I'm going to start with you. We knew this would be some powerful testimony this morning, and I think one of the things that struck me is I expected Earl Grey to ask more questions.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack there. So I think if we slowly go through this now, and I know Debbie Lang, our criminal defense attorney, of course, unaffiliated with the case, about to join us shortly. But my first thought initially was it was shorter than I expected. It went about 45 minutes under direct examination. I think Earl Grey just wanted to get some biographical information on there and then really get at what happened on April 11th. A couple key points I would just take away, again, headlining it. There is just so much here. First, in terms of the traffic stop, I just thought it was an interesting note that she probably wouldn't have made that traffic stop if she was riding alone that day, that she sort of deferred to her training officer who wanted to make the traffic stop. He saw the wrong turn signal on the car in the wrong lane, notices the air freshener, notices the expired tabs, and then they process the ID. They notice the arrest warrant, the order for protection, and so forth, and that escalates from there. But obviously, the idea that Kim Potter, probably deep down inside, as she thinks about what happened that day, says to herself, "I wouldn't have even created that traffic stop." I just thought it was an interesting note. Of course, Tim, you mentioned the fear she sees on Sergeant Johnson's face leaning into the car from the other side. We didn't know what she was going to say about her perception of Sergeant Johnson reaching and holding on to the gear shift, trying to grab Daunte Wright, holding Daunte Wright's passenger back. We didn't expect, or I didn't necessarily think about that. Oh my God, I saw the fear on his face. I've never seen it before. So that idea is sort of building up into her mind. And then there's a blank slate. Let's be honest. She doesn't remember some things that kind of unfold in those seconds. I know we're talking seconds. I can't imagine a human being going through this experience, but it's sort of blank in there. There's some key parts where we wanted to kind of know what's happening in your head, and I just guess the jury isn't going to find out. So with that, let me just bring in Debbie Lang, again reiterating here, a criminal defense attorney here in the Twin Cities, Hallberg Criminal Defense, but very much important to point out to our viewers on the stream that she is not affiliated at all with this case. And Debbie, I was saying to Tim, I just think there's a lot to unpack, so I don't want to create a broad question for you, but you're a criminal defense attorney. You've put your clients up on the stand today. Why don't you start with just how you see Kimberly Potter being perceived by this jury? There was a lot of emotion there, but she also, went through the details, left open the idea that there's some seconds in there she doesn't remember. Your sort of quick assessment of Kim Potter up on the stand.
So generally, I think her emotion came out obviously at the appropriate time. Prior to that, she was coming across one may say cold and stoic, others may say very professional in terms of talking about her career. But her emotion certainly came out, and I believe it came across genuinely. I don't think that was something that she had practiced doing. It came out when she got to the relevant incident on the 11th. I did agree. I heard, Paul, that you'd indicated that you were surprised that the direct examination was so short. I agree with that. I was surprised that they didn't have Kimberly Potter talk more about the things that she was testifying to. Specifically, she noted that the fear in Sergeant Johnson's eyes, or his face, she hadn't seen that before. But her attorney didn't ask her to continue with that thought. What did that tell you? What did you think? What did that make you feel? Her emotion as she made that statement, it's clear, right now. She's frightened. It is upsetting to her. But I was surprised that her attorney didn't ask her to talk more about that, because that's so important when we're addressing the appropriate use of force, whether or not she thought herself or the other officers were in fear of or in harm's way for great bodily harm or death. So simply indicating that there was fear, I'm surprised she didn't go further there.
Deb, Tim Blotz here. You keyed on that moment of testimony that I thought was so important to her defense in that dual track defense that they're now taking about perhaps the authorized use of force, because they felt at the scene, or at least she may have felt at the scene, that her fellow officers were in danger, which under Supreme Court cases we know can justify the use of deadly force. But in this particular moment, I think what's important, this is the first time we're hearing from Kim Potter on this matter. We've heard from her attorneys trying to make this defense. This is the first time that we are hearing from her as to what she saw, because up until this moment, we did not know if she saw Sergeant Johnson inside the vehicle.
Right, and that's exactly why, Tim, I think it's important, and why it surprised me that there wasn't more discussion about that. I recognize and understand that she has moments that she can't recall, and she has lapses in her memory surrounding this incident. That doesn't surprise me one bit. But when she makes a statement that she sees the fear on Sergeant Johnson's face, that is an ideal moment to talk about what that means and what she interpreted that to mean in terms of her training and its relevance in connection with her ability to use of force, deadly or otherwise.
Debbie, well, if the defense explores that, then isn't the next question, why didn't you pull the gun on purpose? If you saw that fear, it's a life and death situation. You have to end the threat. Why not go to the gun? Why go to the taser, given the totality of the circumstances, him behind the wheel? I know she insists it's not in motion, but if it's a life and death situation, don't police pull the gun?
And she certainly could then go back and say her training, that she's been trained to de-escalate. That's something that she'd always done throughout her career. And that was why her intention was to grab the gun to de-escalate. And then she could discuss what that means and what she thought would result as a reaction of pulling and then deploying that taser. Again, I'm speculating here because obviously I've never spoken with Kim Potter, and I wouldn't. But here, it's an opportunity where she's talking about that fear. So I'm surprised the defense didn't run with it more, to be able to, again, even justify the use of her taser and let her explain why she wanted to use a taser. And I'm surprised. So I'm definitely interested to see where the state is going to go with this, or if they are going to stay away from that statement altogether, seeing as the defense didn't go further.
Debbie, we've talked about how some of her testimony may help her own defense, but let me parse out for a little bit now how some of the cross-examination helped the state's case in their charges of manslaughter 1 and manslaughter 2. And in particularly, Aaron Eldridge, the state's attorney there, got her to, in fact, I copied some of this down, you agree that you were bound by police policies at the Brooklyn Center Police Department. She said yes. That you agree that your fundamental responsibility is to safeguard life, right? She answered yes. When she talked about policies, these are policies you agreed to. Yes. You were told time and time again that drawing with the wrong hand could result in an accident. Yes, during her training. So they're trying to build their case to the jury that she violated department policies, which is really kind of central to the charges.
Absolutely. And something else that Ms. Eldridge did, piggybacking on that, which I thought was very good, is that she brought up specific examples of when Kim Potter has pulled her taser. She didn't deploy it, but she pulled it. And Ms. Eldridge went through and really painted a picture of that scenario. And what she was doing, in my opinion, was trying to show that those situations as well were chaotic. That was the term that Kim Potter used when describing what happened on April 11th. And so Ms. Eldridge is painting a picture there of a situation where her colleague, another officer, is hanging on the back of another individual. And again, that you can imagine that scuffle. And Kim Potter pulls a taser but doesn't deploy. Similarly as well, there's another situation where a female in 2016 did not want to be handcuffed and is physically resisting with another officer. Again, in that situation, Kim Potter pulls her taser but doesn't deploy it. So I thought that was a very good play by the state, particularly because they need to try to contradict when Kim Potter saying this was so chaotic on the 11th. Here's what I did. I made this mistake, yet we have other chaotic situations where she didn't. So I thought that was some good cross-examination by Ms. Eldridge.
And I would agree, Deb. I think Erin Eldridge so far is doing pretty well in terms of cross-examining her. The attitude on the stand, I know the emotions there. I don't necessarily like the body language as Erin Eldridge is questioning. Just my quick assessment on TV screen. I am not in the courtroom, but I think Eldridge is kind of meticulously sort of proving the state's case or attempting to based on the charges and putting the two weapons side by side. I mean, I know it's pretty obvious to the eyeball that there's a yellow and black taser, there's a handgun. The handgun's heavier, the different size. We've gone all through that, but seeing that with the defendant on the stand is got to be a powerful scene in that courtroom for the jury to process that. And the only other thing I do want to kind of mention here is some of the pool notes that we've gotten now on the break. We're just wondering about how the jury is taking it all in and then seeing note taking and then people not distracted, not dozing off, needless to say. But the emotion portion here at the end, you saw Potter's attorneys step in and ask for the lunch break. She'd been on the stand for about 90 minutes, 45 minutes under direct, 45 minutes under Erin Eldridge's cross-examination. She was getting upset there. And in the back of the courtroom, Katie and Aubrey Bryant, Daunte Wright's parents, are back there, back of the room holding hands. Katie Bryant crying as the video is advanced frame by frame, that body camera footage. Aubrey takes her hand and tears up too. So that courtroom obviously filled with so much emotion, both up on the witness stand and then obviously in the back of the courtroom as the family watches that. So as we come back, everybody will collect their thoughts. We go back up there. Where else, Debbie, do you think the state needs to go as they come back? What other areas of Potter's story do you see them trying to tackle? Again, we heard her, and I know I've asked you about this a lot, the "I'm going to prison" line that she doesn't really recall saying, but Earl Grey tried to lead her down the road of police and current state of affairs. Obviously, this happened right in the middle of the Derek Chauvin trial. And I think they tried to talk it away along those lines. But I would imagine Erin Eldridge is going to press her on, what do you mean you're going to prison? If you saw all that fear in Sergeant Johnson's eyes and you saved his life, why wasn't that top of mind at the moment?
I absolutely believe that the state will go at Kim Potter for that specific statement. And that's exactly the reasoning behind it, Paul. I agree with that entirely. They're going to be talking to her about, the statements about being suicidal, the statements about going to prison, her reaction, which, was extreme. And, she continued to say over and over again, oh my God, oh my God. And so those statements are definitely going to be highlighted by the state. And I suspect Kim Potter's response, and she will likely be emotional as the prosecution continues to cross-examine her about the aftermath and those statements. I think Kim will begin to get emotional again, but I expect the state will forge ahead and they will continue on that path, because it is very important for the exact reasons that you stated. It contradicts the defense's argument that Kim Potter was justified and she knew what she was doing at the time when this occurred in terms of trying to deploy the taser.
Debbie, Tim here. I think another instance here under cross-examination that was effective for the state is trying to eat at the defense argument that she could have been authorized to use force. And under direct questioning from Erin Eldridge, when she said, "You never saw a weapon on Mr. Wright, right?" And Kim Potter said no.
Yep,
There were a couple more questions, and she finished it off by saying, you never said there's a gun in the car with the subject saying, I'm coming after you. And Kim Potter said no.
Yep, I agree, Tim. And she, Ms. Eldridge, went further as well in that train of thought when she was talking about the pursuit policy that Kim Potter reviewed that very day with her trainee. And Ms. Eldridge specified that a gross misdemeanor warrant pursuit is not allowed pursuant to policy that was reviewed that day. Additionally, during the cross-examination, Ms. Eldridge had asked about unsnapping her firearm. And Kim Potter said, I don't remember doing that. And Ms. Eldridge put up a still photo of that. I was a bit surprised she didn't play the video, which may make it more clear, because the hand simply being on a holster does not indicate that it is going to be unsnapped. However, the video would show that more clearly. So I was a bit surprised that she didn't show the video in that regard when Kim Potter said that she didn't recall unsnapping her firearm.
All right. Debbie Lang, who's one of our legal analysts here from Hallberg Criminal Defense in town, no connection to this case at all. Debbie, we thank you for your continued legal analysis and helping us understand this. We're right now in the middle of our lunch break, and we're about 20 minutes into it already. This typically goes for about an hour each day. We do expect the court back with more cross-examination of Kim Potter at about 1:30 Central Time. In the meantime, we want to take you back to the very beginning of her testimony on the stand. She's being questioned by her attorney, Earl Gray, laying out her training in law enforcement and how she got into it. So let's take you back to Kim Potter, now on the stand from earlier today.
I have to a perjury that no truthful answer questions.
I do.
This case.
I do, Your Honor.
Please have a seat, and please remove your mask. And Ms. Potter, I gave the rules for testifying, and you've been in the courtroom. Do you need for me to repeat them?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. State your full name and spell it.
Kimberly, Kimberlyann, Potter, Potter.
All right, counsel.
Thank you. Ms. Potter, will you speak into the mic? Because both of your lawyers have a hard time hearing.
Yes, there's just Kleenex here.
Okay. You stated your full name. How old are you, ma'am?
49.
And are you married?
Yes.
And is your husband in the courtroom?
Yes, he is.
And what's his name?
Jeff Potter.
And how long have you been married?
Over 25 years.
And when did you first meet your husband?
When I was 15.
And you're in high school?
Yes.
And did you reunite much later?
Yes, when I was in college.
And what does your husband do?
He works for a healthcare system now.
Is he a retired police officer also?
Yes, he is.
And where was he a police officer?
Fridley, Minnesota.
Was he also a member of a drug task force?
Yes, he was.
And with respect to your children, do you have children?
Yes.
And what are they, 2 boys?
I have 2 boys,
And what are their names?
Nicholas and Samuel.
And are they in the courtroom?
No, they're not.
And where is Nicholas?
He's an active duty Marine.
And where's that at?
He's currently stationed in Florida.
And your other son, where's he at?
He's in college in North Dakota.
And are they going to be home for the holidays?
Yes, they will.
Is your mother in the courtroom?
Yes.
And your sister?
No, she's not.
But is your brother in the courtroom?
Yes, he is.
And besides your brother and your mother, your father is deceased?
Yes.
And do you have any other siblings?
I have another sister and a brother.
And what are they? You know what their ages are?
My oldest sister's in her 50s, and my other brother's in his 50s also.
And what do they do for a living?
My sister works for a medical device company. My oldest brother works for a parking company, and my other brother works for retail.
Going back to when you were a youngster, where did you go to elementary school?
Immaculate Conception Catholic School,
And where was that located or is located?
Columbia Heights, Minnesota.
And did you live in that neighborhood?
Yes, I did.
While you're at elementary school, while you're going to that school, did you have a police officer visit your school?
Yes.
And do you actually know his name today?
Yes, it's Officer Michael McGee,
And where was he a police officer at?
the Columbia Heights Police Department.
And why was he at your school?
He was doing bicycle safety for grade school kids.
And you remembered his name. Anything else that was significant about him that caused you to do something in your life?
He was, on that occasion, he really influenced me as a youngster that the police are good people, and I wanted to be something like that someday.
And because of that, and because of him being at your school, did you start out doing that?
Yes.
And what was your first job or volunteer work as some type of a law enforcement officer, student, explorer, school cop?
Well, the first thing I did was when junior high was a school patrol officer, if that counts.
Yes, that does count. And what did a school patrol officer do back then?
It was junior high, so we helped the younger grade school age children get across the street.
And did you continue to do that throughout junior high?
Yes, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade.
And after getting into high school, what did you do?
The Fridley Police Department came to my high school and had a booth set up for the Fridley Police Explorers.
And did you join the Explorers?
Yes, I did.
Why did you join the Explorers? First of all, what is an Explorer?
It's part of the Boy Scouts of America. It's a area where you can have career enhancement, or you can learn about different jobs like law enforcement or firefighting, things of that nature.
And were you an explorer throughout your high school days?
Yes, I was.
I can't remember if I asked you what high school you went to.
Totino Grace High School in Fridley.
With respect to criminal justice or law enforcement, while you were in high school, besides being an explorer, did you do anything else?
I had jobs.
Okay, what was your job?
My first job was at a gas station.
What did you do there?
Clerk, cashier.
And did you continue that job throughout high school?
Yes, and into college.
Okay, so your next visit was college.
Yes.
Where did you go to college?
St. Mary's College in Winona, Minnesota.
And that's about, what, 70 miles from here, 80?
Yeah, it's down towards La Crosse.
Okay, it's in Winona.
Yes.
And what was your major at St. Mary's?
Criminal justice and sociology with an emphasis on elderly studies or geriatric sociology.
Why did you take those courses?
I wanted to go into law enforcement, and I had an interest in serving the older community and understanding their needs and wants.
Did you graduate from St. Mary's?
Yes, I did.
And was that a 3-year program, 4 years?
It was a 4-year program. I finished it in 3.5 because I had an internship in the summer.
And where did you internship?
The Columbia Heights Police Department.
Columbia Heights Police Department?
Yes.
Okay. And what did you do at the Columbia Heights Police Department?
I was assigned to an officer who was in their community-oriented policing program.
Did you also continue your explorer career while in college?
I stopped being an explorer after my freshman year, and then I role-played at the annual conference.
What does that mean?
Every year the Explorer program had an annual conference at Breezy Point Resort, and they needed role players, and they liked to use students or people that were in law enforcement.
So you graduated from St. Mary's,
Yes.
and what did you do after that?
After that, I would have gone to Skills in the summer of 1994.
Okay, and what do you mean by that?
I went to Skills.
What does that mean?
I went to the police certification program so I could get hired.
And where was that at?
Alexandria Technical College.
In Alexandria, Minnesota?
Correct.
So everybody knows about 120 miles, 30
Yes.
from here? And did you stay there while you were being educated?
Yes.
What kind of a program was that? How long was it?
It was 10 or 12 weeks.
And what do you mean, is that where you obtain your skills to to apply as a police officer?
Yes, it was a hands-on training. I had the college education, the book knowledge, and then I went there for my skills program or my hands-on part from my getting my license.
After this program, did you go out and try and get a job in law enforcement?
Yes, I did.
And were you successful at first?
Yes.
Well, did you have a job at Anoka?
Yeah, I worked at the Anoka Metro Regional Treatment Center because I graduated in January, or I'm sorry, in December. I couldn't go to skills until the next summer, so I had to I got a job.
All right, so, but you worked skills, you were in Alexandria, correct?
Yes.
And the job you got was at Anoka State Hospital?
Yes.
That was between your skills? Say that again.
So
slowly.
I got hired there in February, and I worked for a year on a calendar year. But the Anoka City Police Department would allow their students to, or their employees, I'm sorry, to go to skills and still have a job on weekends or when they would get back before they got hired as a law enforcement officer.
So at Anoka State Hospital, what did you do?
I was a security officer.
And Anoka State Hospital is basically a detox center now, is that right?
No, it had a detox. It had a countywide detox and a detox program. It also had drug and alcohol abuse rehabilitation and mental illness.
And what did you do there? You were in security?
Yes.
Does that mean you had to deal with the folks that are staying there, the residents?
Yes.
And were you successful in that?
Yes.
After working there, where did you go next?
I left there and got hired at the City of Brooklyn Center.
In what year were you hired at the Brooklyn Center Police Department?
1995.
And when were you sworn in?
February the 27th.
Of 1995?
Correct.
Who was that you're sworn in?
My mother and my father.
So after you're sworn in, you started working as a Brooklyn Center police officer?
Yes.
And what year was that again?
1995.
So that would be, my math, 26 years before you resigned? Is
Yes.
that a fair statement?
Yes.
When you worked as a police officer at Brooklyn Center throughout those 26 years, did you remain a patrol officer all during that time?
I did.
And why was that? Why didn't you attempt to go up the ladder like the other officers we heard from?
I liked my work. I enjoyed working with community. I didn't want to be in an administrative role.
But did you also, even though you were a patrol officer, you did take part in other programs, for example, the FTO program, right?
Yes, I did.
And that's the field training?
Yes, I was a field training officer for many years.
How many years?
I don't have an exact number, 10 to 15.
And we've learned in this case what a field training officer does, but very briefly, what did you do?
I would get probationers in different stages of their training, either in their first phase, their second phase, their third phase, or their final phase. Usually, the primary phase or the first phase and the final phase were always with the same FTO. And then other FTOs would train the other two stages.